Hello everyone. So today I'm going to walk you through some important terms for chapter 5, which addresses gender socialization. So there are a lot of different theories about gender development that your chapter covers. I'm just going to briefly talk on the major ones. But in general, gender socialization is the internalization of social expectations and attitudes associated with one's perceived gender. So the idea that girls and women act X way, boys and men act Y way. We don't really have them for people who are non-binary, so that becomes an issue, obviously, as well. But these are the general categories that are displayed on the screen. So psychoanalytic theories suggest gender development is controlled by unconscious forces. Freud literally talked about psychodynamics as forces of the mind. He really wanted to make his theories like physics, but for the brain or the mind. He didn't do a very good job. He was sort of working with what he had at the time. But he had a lot of problematic ideas, like the fact that he just assumed that males were superior to women. He talked about the Oedipus complex, which, if you're not familiar with this, essentially he thought that all little boys were attracted to their moms, but that because of castration anxiety, their fear that, like, because they were in competition with dad for mom, dad could chop off their phallus or penis, they would start, like, hanging out with dad. Penis envy was the idea that at some point little girls would realize, oh, I don't have a penis, I don't have a phallus, I need one. And then the Electra complex was actually what Jung, who was one of Freud's contemporaries and one of his students, came up with. Freud just applied the Oedipus complex to everyone. But Jung came up with the Electra complex to sort of explain women and said essentially women will identify with their moms, and they can only resolve it by accepting the inferior status of femininity, and that the only way that both Freud and Jung said the only way to resolve penis envy was to give birth to a male child, in which case you now have the phallus. Yeah, we can all see how problematic that is, right? Just so we're all on the same page. So as you can imagine, even some of Freud's contemporaries criticized him for this. One of my favorite psychologists is Karen Horney. So she was one of the first women to go to medical school, period, and then also became a psychoanalyst. And she argued that power inequality is not biology, not some sort of Oedipal or Electra complex, cause the psychological differences observed in girls and women as opposed to boys and men. She said, you know, it's not that they envy the phallus, it's that they envy the fact that men can vote and can get jobs and are allowed to do these things by society. She came up with the idea of womb envy, that men might envy women's ability to give birth. It is sort of miraculous that they can create life, right? And that might be a motivation for men's desire to dominate women. Nancy Chodorow argued that most children develop a primary attachment to their mother regardless of gender, and that girls never fully disconnect from their mothers and thus embrace the caregiving and emotional intimacy, and boys have to develop this independent sense of themselves. And these are all sort of stemming from attachment theory. Contemporary psychoanalytic theorists and psychodynamic theorists really recognize more diversity in family structures, the fact that not every family even has a mother figure, right? And the role of the child in influencing the family and not just vice versa. Behavioral and learning theories think about how the environment influences behavior, and in this case, we're talking particularly about gender development. So operant conditioning is the idea that certain behaviors are reinforced or rewarded in our society, and others are punished. So take something like, oh, you're such a good little girl for sitting so quietly and listening, right? Versus women should be seen and not heard, right? Or even more direct punishment for speaking your mind. Children often receive subtle messages from parents about gendered behavior, and boys are especially discouraged from feminine behaviors and interests because they're so devalued in our society, to be perfectly honest. Tomboys are much more accepted than girly boys, or, things along those lines. Social learning theorists suggest that learning takes place in a social setting. So sometimes even if you yourself haven't been reinforced or punished for something, when you see other kiddos get reinforced or punished for certain behaviors, you will emulate the behaviors that are reinforced and try to avoid the behaviors that are punished. This is sometimes called observational learning. Now, in terms of cognitive development theories, these emphasize that the children's understanding of gender goes through stages corresponding to the development of cognitive skills. So self-socialization is where kids look for clues about how to behave and integrate this information into an understanding of how they actually behave. Gender labeling is the ability to say whether someone's female or male. Gender schema theory focuses on kids' basically ideas, categories, network of assumptions about how people with different genders are supposed to think, feel, and act. And again, they're getting all this from what other people are telling them and showing them. And gender constancy is the understanding that even if a change in physical appearance takes place, a girl will be a girl and a girl will be a boy, which is sort of interesting in the context now of individuals who are non-binary, individuals who are trans, right? Holes can be poked in this. Now, social construction theories look at cultural beliefs about gender, and the theory is that these exist to uphold social and economic systems and inequalities. And we'll talk more about this in the women's bodies chapter as well. But the idea is that these gender roles exist because it works for society, right? So example, in modern Western culture, it works really well for women to provide the childcare without parents having to pay for it, even if the woman is actually working herself too, right? And to do the majority of the housework. And because in the majority of cases, women don't stand up for themselves, becomes an issue that we just sort of roll with. The postmodern perspective suggests that knowledge isn't objective, it's constructed. And therefore it can change as a function of time, place, or culture. So you're going to have an influence of your culture on the facts about gender. And then doing gender, we've mentioned previously, this comes from Judith Butler's great essays, and talking about performing or enacting behavior associated with specific gender in day-to-day life. There are many sources of gender socialization. The media is a primary one, toys, they're gonna get information from parents and peers, and also at school. Now, gender segregation is a really interesting thing, and this is where children will sort of divide off into girls and boys in class, on the playground, things along those lines. So kids actually only spend about 10% of their time with peers of other genders. And this can leave out gender variant children, right? Which group are they going to hang out with? And the more time you spend in these gender segregated groups, the more gender typical your behavior becomes. Sometimes the activities that reinforce the borders between girl spaces and boy spaces is referred to as border work. And this can include things like playing games of chase, talking about cooties, things along those lines. Hidden curriculum is the ways that the school environment indirectly teaches norms, beliefs, and values. So dress codes being enforced more strictly for girls than for boys. Black students being disciplined more often than white students, especially among girls, for the same behaviors. The books that you read, who are the authors? Are they all, white men? Or are you getting female authors? Are you getting authors of color? So in terms of stages of gender development, for the baby, you often find out the sex before the fetus even becomes a baby, before it's even born. If you have certain genetics testing done, you can actually determine the sex as early as 12 weeks. Infant sex is considered the most important information about them. So now being a mom myself, this is like the first thing people find out when you're pregnant. They want to know, like, oh, is it a boy or a girl? Are you having a boy or a girl? What are you having? And it's kind of like, I'm having a human, not a dog, right? We didn't find out our baby's sex until she was born. And that drove some people nuts. Some people thought we knew and we just weren't telling them. But for us, we just wanted a healthy baby. It didn't really matter. We also didn't want to start gendering the fetus before it was even born. And then infant sex does shape how people describe and interact with the baby. My favorite study about this is they showed people the same picture of a baby, and just half the people they said it was a boy, and half the people they said it was a girl. And it was a picture of the baby crying. And when people were asked to describe the girl, they said, oh, she's sad, she needs comfort. And when they described the boy baby, again, exact same picture of exact same baby, they said, oh, he's mad. So people immediately gender and interpret behavior based on that. In preschool, they'll start learning about traditional stereotypes associated with gender. They'll start to display gender rigidity, which is strict and inflexible gender typing. And again, here's where it starts to really be an issue for gender nonconforming kids when they go to preschool and these traditional values are in place, whereas their household might be more open. In middle childhood, that gender rigidity goes down for girls, but not boys. Again, tomboys are common and accepted. It's not accepted to like girly things as a boy. Development of gender constancy becomes an issue. It becomes something they do here. And then the realization that masculinity conveys more power really becomes something they are aware of. And in adolescence, there's gender intensification, which is rigid enacting of gender roles. So this is where you'll see girls start to get into makeup or dressing in very feminine ways. Non-gender conforming girls experience peer victimization and exclusion here. And again, not just from the boys, from other girls. Adolescent girls can be awful. Some of us have experienced that, unfortunately. And then the timing of puberty can impact girls. So if you have an early puberty, you're at higher risk for a lot of different things, including drug and alcohol use. All right, so that's all I have for this chapter. I hope that you enjoy your discussion about it, and I'll see you in the second half.